All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled AI's Impact on Cybersecurity, Applications and Challenges. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. Welcome everyone. We are so excited to have this panel of esteemed experts here. We're very excited to hear your insights today. So my name's Patrika Elise. I'm here with AI4 to MC and moderate this session. And first, I'd like to kick us off with a round of introductions. So let's go around the virtual room and meet our panelists. Mishu, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, pleasure to be here. Mishyrahman, I'm the head of cyber strategy at a global financial services firm. Prior to that, I worked in national security and defense, all the way up to national security, working across different industries, including US healthcare and US finances.
Awesome. Excited to have you here. All right, Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Sherman. I'm a director in CERT. That's the cybersecurity part of the Software Engineering Institute, a research center based at Carnegie Mellon University. My teams work on use of AI and cybersecurity and securing AI systems, as well as how to improve the software development process. I personally have been working in the area for quite a while, as well as in commercial and academic positions.
Awesome. Excited to hear more about your experience in this area. David.
Thanks, Patrika. I appreciate the time to be here. So my name is Dave Monahan, and I have been in security for about 25 years. Been lucky enough to work across multiple industries, including outsourcing, telecom, high tech, finance, banking, and currently I'm the business information security officer at a major pharmaceuticals company.
Awesome. Very exciting. We have a great group of perspectives here. I'm very excited to hear how this goes. So let's go ahead and get into our questions. Question one is, some organizations say they are already leveraging AI for cybersecurity, while others remain skeptical on AI's real value for combating cyber threats. Where do you stand on this spectrum? So Mark, I'm going to kick it off with you.
Oh, well, thanks. It's sort of an interesting question. It sort of suggests that some people think they aren't using AI for cybersecurity now. In fact, if they have any kind of virus scanner or email spam detector or advanced firewall or intrusion detection system, there already is AI systems built into them and they're being widely deployed. So in fact, it is quite prevalent throughout the industry. How well it works, well, that varies a lot on people's experiences. If you have a chance to look at some of the logs of things that get rejected from your email, it's doing quite a nice job. But on the other hand, we all have experienced requests from the Prince of Nigeria every now and then to steal a system. So nothing is perfect. It will get better. And over time, as we learn more and more, we'll see further applications of it.
Excellent point. Thank you. Mishu.
No, I agree. I think for the most cases, it's already in use in terms of the broader comfort or rather focus. I think, yes, it should be a key component of the CIO or the CISO strategy with the maturity roadmap. But however, not as a stamp on. The analogy I would draw is if you think of cloud, maybe 7-10 years ago, going through the exploration phase from a capability perspective, from an industry partner perspective, looking at a business case and a use case perspective, but then also looking at the organizational readiness, right? So that means both the technology, the infrastructure, as well as the people from a skills perspective, as we've seen some challenges in cloud transition where there's lack of a readiness. In terms of spectrum, AI, as my fellow panelists know, it's pretty wide. So you could be from just RPA and automation capabilities, use cases to consider from a comfort perspective, all the way up to predictive analytics or even prevention. So there is ample value stream to explore across every organization, across every industry, and to convince the C-suite.
Excellent points there. Thank you. And David, what is your thoughts here?
I'm on board with the rest of our panelists here, and I have to agree with Mark. You'd have to work pretty hard to find a major component of your cybersecurity tool strategy that doesn't already have AI of some kind built into it, whether that's supervised or unsupervised learning or et cetera. There's multiple types. It's definitely here to stay. It's becoming a larger and larger part of these underlying technologies, because as we continue to be attacked, right, the attack surfaces grow, and not only that, but the number of attackers and types of attackers are growing. It seems like exponentially, right? Somebody new gets into the hacking game every day, and so, you know, as humans, we can't deal with the volume of information that we're being hit with. We have to have better means, and the old idea of triggers and things like that, where you set thresholds, that's not doing it anymore, right? It hasn't done it for a long time. So the introduction of these various types of learning systems to deal with the not only single attacks, but more so the complex attacks, and look at the multiple facets of how something is trying to attack you, and giving the analyst a jump on that, very, very valuable.
That's a great point. And I think that's a great way to segue into our next question. The next question is, which opportunities exist for leveraging AI in cybersecurity? And we'd love any examples that you can give. We understand there are some restrictions there, but we appreciate any examples. Mishu, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. I think the key or the prevalent use case is around data correlation. As an example, if you think of correlating threat intelligence data, contextualizing that within the business assets, where's the key business assets at any given company, leading to either vulnerability management or change in controls and environment from a dynamic manner. That's one area. Another area I would say is around anomaly detection, be it from internal threats, so UBA, so user behavior analytics, or external. Yeah. The key thing I would say is speed. Speed is security operations. I'm sure my panelists will agree. So if you look at the average cycle on when a breach is detected, right, beyond when it actually happened, months, right? So how can we leverage AI to quickly eliminate false positives so the human can focus and deep dive into either validating something or remediating, to actually maturing the overall SOC to automatically stop an anomaly based on studies, either for machine learning that's been done. Those are the opportunities that I see. Overall, I think it requires a shift in opportunity from signature. As the fellow panelist has said, it's not just looking at signatures, but looking at more behavior, looking at heuristic shift. Common example everybody can relate to is Netflix. Creating personas based on interest. Like, so what show are you watching? What series of shows are you watching? Based on then creating a profile, then creating a cluster around that. So same thing needs to happen in the security space, in the companies, on looking at activity monitoring at the user level, at the network level, at the database and processing level. So those are the opportunities that I see are kind of common.
Excellent point. And David, are you seeing the same opportunities in the pharmaceutical field?
I am, and even, you know, I don't think there is a field that can't benefit from everything that Mishu said there. I mean, and with the technologies we have, whether he mentioned user behavior analytics, that's a huge one for correlating multiple types of activities into a common thread, if you will, as well as the SOAR, the security operations and analytics technologies. Those are great for being able to evaluate information and then based on your playbook, determine a course of action that has to be taken at some point, either before or after notifying the analyst. Your SIM technologies now are including that, as well as modules for security. So there's absolutely a huge value in these things, and being able to speedily analyze multiple streams of information. I mean, we can now use those to correlate activities from multiple devices. If you have someone who's trying to attack you from a mobile standpoint and a system, or they've hacked into multiple systems across the globe, they can use that to fingerprint those activities and say, oh, look, this is actually not singular events. These are all part of a correlated attack. And so now we have to do X, Y, or Z to be able to respond to that and try and thwart that activity.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thank you. And Mark, from you have more of a development perspective here. What opportunities are you seeing?
Sure. So there's been a lot of ways that can be applied operationally that we've just gone through and discussed, which are very valid and very important. But if you think about the SolarWinds example, and although people call SolarWinds as a particular attack, it really was a collection of different techniques that were used all at once. And one of them has to do with the development process of building the software. And it turns out that there is a lot of opportunity for applying AI into the construction process for building software. Just to give a couple of examples, there's a common technique of testing called fuzzing, in where you basically try special kinds of inputs to see if it can cause a system to misbehave. Using AI can make that a much more efficient way to explore how you can poke the software to see if it's behaving the way you want. Moving up a level, things like red team or penetration testing are very labor intensive, very highly skilled activities, much of which can be approached by using artificial intelligence systems to supplement what the humans are doing in order to see whether you can actually get into a system or not, check for configurations, all sorts of different techniques. More hands-on kinds of things, there's a large set of tools that are used to evaluate source code to understand whether it's weak or not. Those generate a lot of diagnostics because the understanding of programs, like understanding natural language, can be very tricky. The use of artificial intelligence can be applied there to understand what programs are trying to do. And actually, in the best case, actually apply verification techniques, which use a lot of formal language provers, theorem provers, again, more artificial intelligence technology, to give you either confidence or actually prove that a piece of software is invulnerable to attack. So there's a lot of opportunity there just to lock down the new systems that we are building, rather than having to fix the barn door after it's been open and the attack has happened.
Wow, that's a lot that goes into just being able to defend an organization. Mishu, you have some experience in national security. What's your perspective on what Mark said?
No, Mark brought a really good example. Much like not just taking AI out of the picture, cybersecurity does need to be a enterprise security posture as well as a life cycle approach. So what Mark just spoke on is, think of early stage. You're actually creating you're creating software or enhancements and developments, where pen testing, the network defense is downstream. So I think that's a key highlight. We often forget that it is not hey, everything's done and built, now how do you defend the castle? But truly, as we think of AI use cases, both opportunities, we do need to consider across the entire life cycle, because there are pockets. I don't need enough time for this panel to go through every single use case, but there are pockets of opportunity across the entire life cycle. That's exactly what Mark just highlighted.
Excellent. David, anything to add there? I know you have security experience from a wide range of organizations.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Mark touched on in a brief word, right? He said supplement, and I think that's a key aspect. AI is a fantastic tool. It's one of the tools and one of the capabilities in our arsenal, but it's not the only one. And the human mind is still quite capable, and we hire people for that brain and for that experience. And so I think it's important to note that as we continue to develop AI, it's not here to replace people. It's here to augment our ability to utilize people and give them a means to a more fast resolution to determine outcomes. And one of the things I've liked about some of the AI systems I've looked at is when it essentially does a decision tree and looks at the inputs and determines, no, this is a dead end. We're not going to do this. We're actually going to go over here because this particular set of choices or options seems to have a more likely outcome in terms of what we need to do. And I think that's one of the huge aspects from a person perspective, right? Because I personally would have to go down each leg of that decision tree and go, nope, that was bad. Nope, that was bad. Whereas an AI system, for a lot of those types of decisions, can do that very, very quickly and get to the top one or top two most probable outcomes and events, and then drive the analysts to go do that. Are they perfect? No, but they'll get you there a lot faster than having to have done that by hand. And also, a lot of that also keeps us from having to develop as much singularly custom things, right? We can develop scripts and apply them into our AI technology for our response technologies and our analytics technologies, but we don't have to create something as a one-off for every single event and go, I got to create a quick Python or Perl script to do this. We've already got that stuff developed. It's in our playbook, and the system can leverage those as quick or more quickly than we can.
That makes sense. I think that's a great. It's a great time to move into some of the challenges surrounding these applications. So, which challenges do you anticipate or already notice when it comes to leveraging AI for cybersecurity? And David, let's stick with you for this one.
I think it sounds like I almost jumped the gun on that one. That was a great lead-in, right? That was
a little bit.
Good straightening in for myself. But I think that from that perspective, there is a lot that we already see out there. I think we've talked about quite a few of them as we've gone along. and I think that even more key is that there's other areas that we haven't really even begun to look at AI or deploy it, I should say. I'm sure there's researchers looking across the board, and Mark can probably speak to that. But there's areas of technology we haven't yet begun to really core deploy AI in that will be very, very useful. And I know I mentioned some technologies earlier where it already exists in terms of like the SIM technology, SOAR technologies, security analytics, whether that's UEBA or others. Mark mentioned malware, et cetera. So it's out there, and every day those developers are adding new capabilities to those models. And then the cool thing about this is as you add data to the models, right, they're able to improve themselves in terms of their analytics and response capabilities, whether that's an actual response or making recommendations. I think that there are a lot of companies out there right now that are a little hesitant to go for fully automated AI in terms of response, right? And that's been my concern and other of my peers as well. But we're getting closer. And so what usually has to happen is you pull in the system, you create all the constructs for the AI, and then you let it do all the analysis and get up to that point where it says, okay, now I need to involve an analyst. And Mr. or Miss Analyst, can you make this decision? Should I go left or should I go right? I recommend going right, says the machine. And based on that recommendation and what the person knows, they can choose go right. And the machine continues to function and do its thing. And at the end, it comes back and says, oh, hey, I executed those operations, and here's the outcome of whatever you told me I should be able to do. And what happens is we usually have very little of fully automated, right? We have, but as we go along and we say, okay, I've done this particular thing with the system 100 times, I'm more comfortable. I'm going to take myself out of the equation and I'm going to make it fully automated. And that becomes fully automated. And that process repeats, and depending upon the criticality of potential impacts, it may take longer to become confident in the computer's decision. Or maybe you do find an issue with it and you go back to the developers and say, hey guys, this is a problem, can we fix this? And I think we're all trying to get to more fully automated and out of the automated assisted, and that's where AI is going to continue to help us. But it's a collaborative effort between the people in ops and the developers and the researchers and learning how best to manage and analyze that data and then get to the outcome we're trying to get to.
Wow. Mark, are you seeing some of the same challenges from the developer side?
So I think there's some interesting challenges, but I do want to riff on something that David was discussing. In order to get those really skilled analysts that you want, they need to be exposed to lots of areas. They need to be exposed to lots of situations. They can't be a good analyst if they only see the one crisis that hits every 6 months. They need to be involved, the sort of train as you fight kind of mentality. And what we have seen is a growing use of artificial intelligence to build and simulate the kinds of environments in order to teach analysts what they may be seeing and what actions they take and what reactions the adversary may take, so that when a real attack happens, they understand the process by which they should handle it, as opposed to just taking a course and passing an exam and hoping that they're good to go. But there are other challenges that I think are being faced with for using AI systems. So actually the most common AI system are rule-based systems. Everyone thinks about machine learning because it's sort of the sexiest one, but the most deployed one is in fact rule-based ones. As you get lots and lots of rules, you get a very complicated ontology, and it's very hard to keep them consistent. And so usually those systems are self-limiting because they become so complicated. To talk about the decision tree that David was referring to, you don't understand anymore what the decision tree really looks like. And so it limits how much they can be expanded. On machine learning, though, which again is the sexier one that people are talking about, most of it uses, as was alluded earlier to, supervised learning. That's the technical term to mean I need lots of example data that's labeled as such. This is a picture of a banana, this is a picture of a cat, and you need several million of them, and then it can recognize a banana or a cat. Well, in the cybersecurity world, there's a very limited amount of this labeled data. And you typically need enormous amounts, millions and millions of examples in order to have a learning system be built. And the most sophisticated machine learning-based systems have a lot of internal parameters. And we're not going to get into their internal construction here, except to say that each one is a knob that you can turn. And the bigger ones have literally over 1 billion knobs to train these things, we're talking about CPU centuries. And so it's a very expensive, a very time-consuming, a very laborious process to build these kinds of systems. And that's one of the challenges that we'll be facing as we try to actually use more and more of these kinds of systems.
Wow, that's quite a bit that goes into these. It's amazing to see. Mishu, I know financial services has some very unique applications for this. What are the challenges that you're seeing?
I'm going to start with the humans. I'm going to start with talent first. I would say recruiting, hiring. Mark touched on it a little bit. It's a combination of skill set and in-house upskilling. I have positions open right now, right? So at the senior level and at intermediate level. So recruiting and combining the right skill set, as he said, is only one dimension. The second dimension is once you have that talent in-house, how do you make it work? It is more of an art. You can't just drop in a data scientist and expect it to work with the cybersecurity or the SOC, all of a sudden do data correlation and figure out there's a threat in the network. So a lot of organizations, especially in financial services, is kind of going through that journey and learning on what is the right model of that combination of skill set that you can bring in. If you cannot bring it in, how do you bring in the specialty, maybe just somebody in data science, awesome superstar, and how do you combine that talent and skills to a seasoned cybersecurity professional? So that's one area. The human aside, I would say the second largest challenge is the readiness, getting your ducks in a row. The data sourcing, the standardization, the cleansing, how data is flowing across the different network, across the different source. That is not easy. This is the not so sexy stuff most of us don't talk about, right? So it's not about just creating a model and random forest and decision tree. There's a lot of backend effort that's required. So part of the challenge is how do you manage expectations with the C-suite and the board? To say we just funded an AI or data science, that you're not producing results. We have to communicate. You're essentially having to mature all the foundational pieces just so you could create a machine learning model at an organization. Those are kind of the challenges that I'm seeing.
Wow, excellent points. And David, you had mentioned a lot of different things. Do you have any things to add to what Mark and Mishu have added?
Well, I think it was eloquently spoken, but when Mishu was talking about the training aspect and getting people, ready to go, and I think Mark actually said the same thing as well. That is good, and I'm going to correlate that back to a comment I made earlier with, being able to do more in an automated fashion. And I think that when that happens, we do have to be careful that we don't isolate or insulate, I think, the analysts to the point where they don't understand what's going on. So we want them to be able to use their knowledge and their information to do bigger and better things in the business, which is why we automate. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we do provide those learning environments for them to be able to continue to develop that skill and keep sharp, so that when new things come along that the model don't recognize, they as the human beings go, I think there's something hinky going on here. We need to dig into this, even though the model is saying, hey, everything's good here.
Well, speaking of new things coming about, let's move into our next question. You give me these great segues, David. So the next question is, cyber attacks such as that on the Colonial Pipeline in May seem to be increasing in number. How do you see the threat landscape evolving in the future due to AI? Mark, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach, since this was about how the landscape is evolving due to AI. One emerging threat, the Colonial Pipeline in particular was a ransomware attack, but something more direct was what I'd call the deep fakes. The use of AI has enabled the ability to portray someone who says something that they're not saying, or saying something that they're not saying. And it's one thing, lock up a computer, everyone understands that ransom attack. It's much more subtle when the CEO of the company calls the CFO and says, hi, I need $1 million wire transferred to this place right away because we have a business deal that's going to close by 5 o'clock tonight or something. And so AI has enabled a lot of those kinds of attacks. And as a result, you're going to see a lot more of the falsification, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation across all sorts of media, whether it's text or, a large fraction of what gets published now in local newspapers is in fact generated by AI, because they take some scores from baseball games and they fill in all the color of what really happens. That's a benign example, but you can use it in other kinds of situations. And that's all enabled by advancing AI technology. So it's opened up a whole new attack surface in society beyond the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
Wow, that's a great point. And just a follow-up question on that, in talking about, the CFO, CEO example, there is also a huge risk for the general public to be receiving falsified information. Do you foresee any AI solutions coming around to kind of combat some of the misinformation that can be distributed to the general public?
So there's actually a lot of research, but much like the malware, it's a cat and mouse kind of game. There's a sort of a running joke within the academic community that someone comes up with a way to generate a false image or false video. They publish it. A handful of months later, a researcher publishes a paper saying, here's how you can detect it. A couple of months later, someone says, here's how you defeat the way to detect it, and it goes on. What I think people are now focusing a little more attention on is how to verify the veracity of something. That can you, and to be a simple kind of example, can you put some kind of watermark in there that if there was any alteration done, it would basically trash the watermark in a way that's detectable. So you can't really tell necessarily what was done, but you can tell that something was done, and therefore take appropriate action. One of the big challenges in all that area of research is there's a lot of very benign, desirable edits you want to do. You want to take out red eye. Well, if that destroys the watermark, and you say, oh, I no longer believe that's my cousin Jill anymore because it says that it doesn't have the watermark. Well, we just wanted to make it look better. And so how to make something that accomplishes the things you want to accomplish, but somehow stops the things you don't want to accomplish. We don't have any good answers for that yet, but they're looking at it.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. And yes, thank you for sharing that. Mishu, I'm interested in your perspective from both financial services and national security, both very high risk areas. What do you think?
I think it's going to continue to grow. Even without AI, it's already lucrative. There's ample easy targets. So from a national security perspective, there are lagging industries, which makes it a very lucrative, easy target area. So the incentive is already there. On top of that, there's already syndicate ecosystem built up, right? So between the provider and the facilitator in doing these ransomware attacks, all AI is going to do is basically amplify the opportunity or the speed or the complexity of it. The plus side that I see of the silver lining behind the recent more large-scale attacks, where it's not a isolated single company or a single city, but large affecting like a pipeline affecting entire East Coast of the US, is it is increasing awareness. Increasing awareness at the public level. It is increasing awareness across every board, across every company, because people are talking about it just like we're talking about it. So AI will certainly amplify already the lucrative use cases that exist, but with it also going to be a wake-up call for relatively lagging industries moving forward because of the increase in leveraging AI to continue this on.
Wow. And David, you're dealing with a lot of personal data with the pharmaceutical industry. What's your perspective here?
Well, I think from an attack perspective in AI, I'm going to springboard off of both of what Mishu and Mark said, in that as AI is being used for defense, it can also be further used for attack. And Mark mentioned the deepfake as one kind of side item that's relevant for video. But even so, hackers are generally creatures of habit, right? They use the same tool sets, and they maneuver very tightly to find a path of attack, and then they move in. Whereas with AI systems, since cyber criminals and nation states both have enough cash to do this, they can create learning systems that will pattern themselves after different hackers to use different tools, different methodologies. and do it more rapidly than we have in the past, even with scripting. And I think what will happen there is it'll also make it more difficult for the AI to detect, because they're changing the patterns of behavior. They're able to do it more rapidly, so it narrows our window of response or successful response. And it also makes it more difficult to do any kind of attribution for the attack. I mean, right now, I think some of that's suspect anyway. We won't go down that path, but you know, they try to fingerprint and say, well, this was definitely this particular nation state or this particular you know, cyber conglomerate, you know, hacking group, and I think that can be modified slightly, at least at this point. But I think AI will help to modify that significantly to make it much more difficult to even figure out who actually did it. So I think that's another use from the negative side that that will increase our risk, you know, in the cyber area.
Wow, I mean, just thinking about trying to stay ahead there. Mark, what are some of the ways that you're seeing organizations adapt to the kind of ability to stay ahead of what's going on?
So we have seen, trying to think how to best express this. I'm sorry. The gap between what can be done and what is being done is so large that, with the exception of really advanced nation state organizations, the catch-up is far more important than worrying about the absolute latest kinds of things. You know, there's an old saying, you know, why did you rob the bank? That's where the money is. The reason that most attacks are successful is because they use very already well-proven and tried techniques that the targets have not defended themselves against. And there's so much low-hanging fruit to go after, whether it's for espionage or ransomware or what have you, that closing those gaps, bringing the existing systems up to current technology, not even looking into future technology, would be so much more helpful than worrying about the next great AI technology that we've got in the labs and deploying that. That would only really be necessary against the most determined, most advanced adversary. And frankly, we've got the same kinds of most advanced guys on the other side of the fence. So most of what we worry about in cybersecurity can be handled by things that are well known, which is very frustrating because they are so well known.
Yeah.
Wow. Go ahead. Were you adding something, David?
I think that Mark's right there, right? That what we're defending, it's not even the 80-20 rule. It's like the 95-5 or 99-1 rule. Right? If we had all of our basics in place, a significant portion of these, the majority, vast majority, would be null and void. They wouldn't work, right? But the fact that we still have the ability to let, you know, over entitle people, to allow them to click on links and take over an entire system because they're using an admin or privilege level ID, you know, maybe we don't need to give them that, and people will balk at that, right? We've all been there where it's like, well, I need this because blah 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 reason here, and really it's just for their convenience. And there are some folks that do need it, and then of course there's also the aspect of training that comes into that, and telling people, you know, not to click on the links, and then repeatedly helping them to understand why don't they click on the links and not to click on the links, and some of it's just human error, right? So there is a fact there, but I definitely have to go back with Mark's comment on if we did the basics, we would thwart a huge majority of the attacks, and people wouldn't be clicking on or you know, going to the Nigerian prince to donate a kidney for life flight, or, you know, combine whatever emails you want there.
Mishu, I imagine you're dealing with a lot of the same issues there with the human error.
Yeah, I go back to my point earlier about, yes, it does need to be part of everybody's roadmap, but not as a stamp on. That's exactly why, because we need to take a risk-based approach and a maturity-based approach, right? We shouldn't just jump into, okay, let's deploy AI models or AI partners across the network because everybody else is doing it. Other banks are doing it, other industries are doing it. Meanwhile, your vulnerability management or your patching or your, as Dave said, your identity access management is not on par with how to be. So there needs to be a foundational step-by-step maturity process to say, what are my critical controls or critical risk management things we must do as an organization before we go after the shiny stuff. Everybody should have the shiny stuff in their roadmap, but again, that's why I go back to saying you have to look at the readiness perspective. Have I gone through step 1, 2, and 3 before I want to do step 4? So 100% agree with them. You've got to get your basic hygiene tight and strong before getting into, say, preventive or prescriptive analytics, leveraging AI to prevent the next threat.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you all for sharing on this one. I think it's time to move into our final question. So we've talked a lot about, what we're currently doing and the types of attacks that you're currently seeing. But as AI technology for cybersecurity companies continues to develop, how much of an impact do you anticipate it will make over the next 5 years? And where do you see this impact being the greatest? David, let's start with you for this one.
I think what Mark said really epitomizes this particular question, and that where we are versus where we can go with the AI technology is huge. Over the next 5 years, I expect it to be much more significant because we are collecting more data for each of these tool sets that's trying to do whatever it is, and that data is very valuable to them. I think that the ability for those models to make decisions are going to be much larger, and we're because of the data alone, if nothing else, right? I'm sure Mark can speak to algorithms and all the other cool research stuff going on, so I won't go into that. But I really do believe it's going to make a huge effort. Especially, I think the biggest change that we'll continue to see is in detection response. Whatever tool you're using, right? We're going to see faster detections, and then the ability to get to that resolution sooner to minimize impact of the business. And whether that's let's say a very narrow seconds, right? So there really is no damage, or whether it's just a few minutes as opposed to hours or days. And that's what we've seen thus far, right? We've seen the mean time to resolve a situation, detect, and ultimately close it come from an average of, I think it was 2 years about 5 years ago, and it's been narrowing ever since. And a lot of this is due to the better AI technologies. It's not, I don't think it's due to people, finally getting the tools. I'm sure that helps, absolutely. But I think it's also the tools they have gotten smarter and given them more capabilities.
That's an excellent point. And you highlight a lot about what Mark was talking about. So Mark, what is your perspective there?
So there certainly is a technical aspect of that, and we've spoken, a bit about that during the panel today. I think there's another issue involved when you start talking about how much impact can happen over 5 or 10 years. And I'll call that either the regulatory environment or the sort of the financial insurance environment. As people deploy AI systems, it's been very frequently observed that although you put the human in the loop, and the AI system will come back and say, to be somewhat flippant, yes, this looks like a banana, do you agree? After a while, people hit the yes button, just like they do now when all the windows pop-up come up here. Do you want to let this program completely destroy your machine? Sure, go ahead. They treat the AI system recommendations much in the same way. And now when those systems are making automatic decisions as to whether to cut your customer out or to accept a piece of malware that it erroneously thought was benign, who takes responsibility for that? Who gets identified? What regulations were put in place before systems are allowed to be deployed, especially in sensitive kinds of environments. Right now, I wouldn't call it a Wild West, but it's a largely unregulated environment as to the quality and the responsibilities. I mean, the software licenses on most things that I read are pretty open-ended of we, the vendor, allow you to do only things that we say you're allowed to do, and anything else, is a company secret, with the exception of nuclear power plants. You can't use this to run a nuclear power plant. That seems to be a common exception that I read in all these licenses. So there must be some regulatory reason why that particular clause is always there. But that aside, there is no sort of responsibility that comes along with all of these tools that we're using. And as things like Colonial Pipeline just happened, there may be enough blowback and resulting kinds of things which may temper the pace of some of this technology adoption.
It's an excellent point. Mishu, what's your perspective here?
So I see a huge impact, not just using AI in cybersecurity technology, but also keep in mind the broader AI use case. We also need to protect AI, right? So if you have AI-driven business function and organization, it's also within the perimeter of cybersecurity to protect that AI. So it's not tweaked, it's not manipulated by either another human being or another AI, if you will. So that's one area I think there's going to be a lot of focus. Obviously, I tend to monitor AI use cases, not just in cyber, but broadly across businesses. Within cybersecurity, I think, as David said, detection for sure. There's a couple of stages of detection. So if you think of FBI profiling, it's no different than looking at forensics, but then something already happened. You may be able to faster identify who did it for attribution purposes. But I think more interestingly, what is going to be more prevalent for machine learning is going to be on the preventing side. So going back to the speed that I started the conversation with, speed is everything. So how fast can you predict an attack or the traits of an attack, then be able to stop it or trigger a human to make a decision, leveraging some of the zero trust philosophy? That's going to be a key area across any and all AI-based cybersecurity technology use cases. The second area that I see is common techniques, both clustering and classification, looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework as an example, looking at known advanced persistent threat tactics and techniques, but also combining with heuristic analysis to say what is an anomaly as a recommendation engine to alert the SOC, alert the human, or even directly when the organization is ready, have the AI actually prevent a malicious process from executing. So that I see it will probably be the highest impact area in the next 5 years.
Wow, that's really interesting. And Mark, I know you've talked about protecting AI as well. What do you think, what are you predicting for the next 5 years in terms of protecting the AI that we build?
So there's a couple of different issues involved. One is just, again, on the math, there's a trade-off between having systems that reliably or always find something when it should be there. And again, to use my sort of simple example, do I always recognize a banana when I see it? And I won't accidentally mistake an orange for a banana. But the other hand is, as you do more and more of that, you actually make it easier to fool the system into going into some other place. In a simple way, you can think of a certain set of equations that say, if you fall in this shape, then make one kind of decision. But that shape typically has little dimples in it or little spikes in it. And if you put things that fall by the math in those spikes or in those dimples, then it starts to lose track of what's going on and make bad decisions. We can alter the trade-off between making the right decision and being resistant to attack. But the more resistant you make it, the less precise it will be. It'll miss some bananas if you never want to be attacked by sending in something that isn't a banana. And so, we understand the technology. How one balances that is still an ongoing sort of policy discussion. And it's sometimes difficult to have that discussion because there's a belief that AI is a silver bullet, and people don't appreciate that underneath, these are really statistical systems. There are probabilities. It's not like a payroll system. There is a certain amount of money you get paid every month. A machine learning system is not like that at all, and it's sometimes hard to grasp that. There's also a whole new, what I call level of espionage that's now available. I mentioned earlier that to build some of these really big systems is a lot of effort, it's a lot of work. A lot of money goes in to build this. In ordinary espionage, you get into the system and you suck out all the data in the database or drawings or what have you, and you've now stolen the plans from your favorite airplane company. In the case of a machine learning system, this recognition algorithms are also valuable intellectual property because it costs a lot to build all the stuff. But it turns out that with selective interrogation of it, send the image, is that a banana? How about this one? What about that one? With a well-chosen set of questions like that, you can reverse engineer all of the work that's been done to create that model. And so now a company that spent millions of dollars to build an engine that can recognize bananas can have that intellectual property removed because it puts a system out there so it can look at bananas. So someone starts sending it pictures of things, and all of a sudden another company can start recognizing bananas for a fraction of the cost because it effectively extracted all of that information of how that model was built from the first one. And that's a new kind of espionage, which we fully expect to see more and more of as these systems get deployed further and further.
FireEye, I would say, is a prime case study to exactly what Mark said, right? So looking at what is one of the well-known companies are using, how's that modeling, how's their detection capabilities to reverse engineering and figure out how to evade it. That's a perfect example for what Mark just said.
Wow. David, what's your perspective here?
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting from their perspective, and that Mark is absolutely right. And of course, he's a developer, so he would know the most about this. But from my perspective, as we try to make the system smarter, right, the attackers are going to try and use that intelligence against us to ultimately thwart the system, right? So they're going to keep, that's what they do. The hackers probe the systems, they learn about them, and then from there, they use that knowledge to overcome them. And so as we try to make those systems more and more accurate, right, that actual attempt at accuracy, I think, does potentially cause us problems. And then it's back to what I think Mark was saying earlier about, the guy creates the paper that says, here's how you do this. Well, here's how you thwart it. Well, here's how you thwart thwarting. And it goes back and forth, and it does become that cat and mouse game, or one-upmanship to determine who's gonna ultimately prevail. I mean, we've seen that in the industry. For example, antivirus, anti-malware, right? It's been like that since the first antivirus is made. Yep, we defeated all these guys. We're fantastic. Oh yeah, well, we just figured out how to get past that, and it's been back and forth ever since. So I think AI is going to be similar to that as well, and that we will see advances on both sides because there's money involved, right? As long as there's potential gain of money in some form, either direct money or intellectual property that can be sold or whatever, you're going to have people trying to figure out how to get around these systems.
Wow. Thank you, David. This has been a great conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and I know this virtual audience has found it very eye-opening. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives and giving us a lot to think about. We really appreciate your time today. So we'll have to sign off for now because we are at time, but a big virtual round of applause from me and this audience, and a special thank you to all of you for joining us today for the panel. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.